to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. My name is Barry Schwank. I'm a veterinarian, a pastor, and your host as we explore the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. Before we get started today, I just want to say thank you to all of our listeners. If this is your first time, I want to welcome you. We have lots of episodes archived that explore so many different topics that deal with the journey that we take in our profession as well as in our faith and the way that those two things are intertwined. Today, I think as the time of this recording, we're up to, I think, 800 subscribers now, plus the folks that are listening through the CVM app. Couldn't have done this without any of you, and just so want to say thank you. If you're not yet subscribed, do so that way you are alerted every time new content comes out. Today, I want to give a special shout out to Christy Hopkins and Kathy Wolin and Kevin Winder, who have been faithfully listening from the very beginning, have not missed an episode. I certainly do appreciate you and appreciate your feedback for how we can continue to bless you through all this content. If this is indeed your first time, well, whether it's your first time or not, you are in for a treat today. One of the things that we like to do is to provide a wide and varied amount of content for you to be exposed to on how faith and veterinary medicine fit together. And today the focus is on missions. We have Dr. Rebecca Quam with us, and it looks like you are in a nice, damp, rainy place. How are you today, Rebecca?
Yeah, Barry, I am. I'm here in Kentucky at a Christian camp here where CVM is currently holding their short course. And we had some beautiful weather the last couple of days, but this morning it absolutely poured. So things are a little bit damp and it's a little bit cool, but actually really quite nice and pleasant.
I appreciate you braving the weather to be able to talk with us today. That's quite the commitment. So, for those that aren't aware, Dr. Rebecca Quam has been a long-term CVM field worker in South Africa. How long have you been in South Africa now?
I was in South Africa for just 3 months short of 9 years. So I left in 2015, June of 2015 to go down there. And then I just returned home the end of March of this year.
9 years. And one of the reasons why I wanted to be able to talk with you is because one, I really appreciate your story, but also for folks that are, as we talk about missions, sometimes we just get a snippet of a story, but you've just recently returned to the United States at having transitioned away from that ministry after 9 years. And so I want to talk to you about that process as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you're currently at short course. What exactly is short course for those that aren't familiar?
Yeah, so CVM puts on short course every year, and it's an opportunity for anyone who is interested in doing missions with CVM or interested in missions in general to come along. They have a couple of different tracks. They have a long-term track that focuses on preparing for long-term ministry, serving overseas long-term, and then they have a short-term track which is looking more for people who are interested in going in short-term mission trips with CVM or with others. So they touch on things like support raising, cross-cultural ministry, challenge you can face on the field, different types of veterinary ministry that are out there. How do we as a vet get involved, whether it's through community development or clinic work? I'm speaking tonight about university ministry options. So it's a nice chance for people who are thinking, is this something that I might want to do, to really kind of dip their toe in the water, spend some time. There's a lot of us here who have been on the field as well. So lots of chatting around the dinner table and the breakfast table and the lunch table, and kind of just hearing from those who have been and then sharing with those who are interested in going. People are in the thinking about it phase. People are in deputation support raising phase. People are in the just ready to go phase, come back phase. So there's lots of knowledge that can be gained from coming here. I started going to short course years ago, and now that I'm back, I'm excited to be here. And now I'm kind of on the other side of things as someone who's got the experience this time.
Well, and that's great because even the one of the reasons why even this podcast started is because I too have had lots of those dinner table conversations with people at various stages, and and there's a point where I wish that everyone could have been in on those conversations to hear
Mm,
all of those
yeah.
things. And so this podcast was kind of born out of that. The idea is to be able to just sit down and talk with some folks about their experiences so that everyone else can vicariously kind of
Mm.
join in. So you've been going to short course for quite a while, and this is was short course instrumental in helping you make the decision to go to long-term missions, or how did that process start for you? Where was the beginning of that journey?
Actually, it was short course for me. Um, Back when I first started going to short course, which was must have been 2012, I think. Um, I actually went. I'd kind of been on the CBM email list, but I hadn't really gotten involved at that point in time. I'd been got my degree from the University of Glasgow, came back to the U.S., was working for Banfield, kind of in my hometown area, and had started to get interested in planning for uh, emergency animal shelter. So if there's an emergency and Red Cross comes in, you're not allowed to bring your animal. So what are you going to do? I mean, if you evacuate your house, you're just going to like leave your animals behind. So people don't leave. They won't leave their houses in the evacuation because they can't bring their animals. So there was a real push to develop plans. It has to be people other than the Red Cross, but working with the Red Cross. And my county actually was working to develop an emergency animal shelter plan, and I was involved in the committee with that. And so CVM after short course, they used to offer usually like a 2 day, it was either before or after, a 2 day additional training. And that year they happened to have one on emergency animal shelters. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to go. And so I did that training, but I also did the 3 day short course. And at that time, they had three different options. There was a long-term track, a short-term track, and a workplace ministry track. And so I did like the workplace ministry track because I wasn't going onto the mission field. So yeah,
Famous last words right there.
famous last words. And so I really enjoyed it though. I loved fellowshipping with other Christian veterinarians, amazing just conversations at the dinner table, worshiping together, and I fell in love with short course. So I went each of the next couple of years as well. And I think it was the next year, 2014, no, 2013, that I was sitting at a table. We had a breakout time to share and pray for each other. So I was sitting at a table with a few other people, Dave Curtis, who was then working for CVM, and one of the ladies, I can't remember her name, who was down serving in South America somewhere as a missionary at the time. And we were talking, and the Lord had really brought some challenges into my clinical practice. I had thought about trying to buy into the practice, and then I really just felt that the Lord didn't want me to do that. The current owner was a non-Christian, and I really just felt the Lord saying, don't be unequally yoked with an unbeliever, or even in business. And so I hadn't, and then some of the staff changed. We got a new hospital manager, and she and I just were not clicking right. And there were other things going on, and it had just become a point where I kind of dreaded going into work. I wasn't enjoying it. It was frustrating. And so I was at the point where I figured I need to find a new job. Something's got to change. And so we were sitting around the table. I was kind of sharing that with them to get prayer over it. And I think it was Heidi. She asked me, have you ever considered, going onto the field? I was like, well, no, not really, because I have these, horrible student loans from vet school. So like, that's just not really an option.
Mhm.
And plus, I had thought maybe, 20, 30 years down the line, maybe ministry or missions would be kind of cool, but it just hadn't really entered my brain to do it then. And Dave Curtis, who was sitting across the table, when I mentioned the problem with the student loans, he's like, oh, that's no problem at all. And I said, really? You know some magic like pot of money? He's like, yeah, I do actually. And he told me about MedSend.
Yeah.
And MedSend is an organization that works alongside missionaries, healthcare missionaries, and they include veterinarians in that. And if you are approved by MedSend, then as soon as you go full-time with your agency, they start paying your student loans.
Mhm.
So it allows those of us that have medical student loans to not be kind of crippled by that when we want to do ministry, because otherwise that has to come out of our salary. Missionary salaries are usually really small, and it's just kind of impossible. Or you have to go on income-based repayment, and then your loans just keep building the whole time you're overseas, and and it becomes even more of a burden. So that kind of opened up a door that I hadn't expected or thought about, which would be long-term missions. And I started thinking about it, praying about it, and I felt, sometimes we can kind of sit back and be like, well, when I hear a specific call from the Lord, then I'll go.
Right.
But usually that doesn't happen. Technically, He has already called us in the
Right.
Bible. It's whether or not we're going to listen to that call or whether He has a different plan for us at that time. Some of us are called to be in ministry where we're at, but He has called us all to go to all the nations. And so my thought was, okay, Lord, I'm just going to start moving in this direction. If you don't want me going there, shut the doors. We often pray to open God to open doors, but we forget that He can also close them. To guide our paths and to direct our steps. So I started kind of moving in that direction, chatted with Fred because Africa was kind of on my heart from the beginning. I had done a little bit of work in Africa in the past, and so that was kind of what I wanted to do. So I called Fred and kind of got things started, and that's how I ended up there. So short course was the reason. If I hadn't gone to short course, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity, honestly, because sometimes we think about, well, even if you're familiar with CVM, when you look at short course, you sometimes think that's just the path for those that have been accepted, have committed to long-term missions, not really thinking about those kinds of conversations that when you're wrestling with where God is desiring to use you, a place like short course is a great place because you're surrounded by people that have been asking that exact same question and are at different stages in that process. And there are people that have asked that question and God has closed the door, and they're there. And there's people that have asked that question and the door has been left ajar and they're moving that direction and they're there also. And it's a great way to just sit down and to pray through and to hear people's stories about it. Now, when you spoke with Fred, which is always a dangerous thing, and we've mentioned that multiple times in this podcast, it's a dangerous thing to talk to Fred. How did when you said, Lord, if you want me to keep going this direction, close these different doors, what did God do then to kind of lead you further into this idea of going towards South Africa? And what were some of the things that then happened in your life that began to affirm that you were headed the right direction?
Yeah, well, when I started thinking about going overseas, I thought, because I'd been in small animal practice ever since I graduated, and I thought, oh goodness, I'm going to have to learn to deal with cows and sheep and goats all over again. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, Lord, how am I going to do this? So when I talked to Fred, I was like, well, interested in Africa. And so he was going over a lot of the different options. The other thing I really enjoyed doing was teaching. I knew I enjoyed teaching. I did a lot of teaching with our staff, and I had even spoken at short course. They roped me into that pretty quickly. So I knew I enjoyed that. And so I was chatting with Fred, and he was going over all the different options, and there was rotational grazing in Ghana, and there was, I don't know, something else in Ethiopia and whatnot. And I had looked online. I had gone to South Africa in my undergraduate for 2 weeks doing a biology research trip that was funded by my university, my undergraduate university. And I had really fallen in love with the country. And so I had looked on the CVM webpage to see if there was a position in South Africa listed, and there wasn't. So I was like, okay, Lord, wherever you want me. And so as I'm chatting with Fred and he's giving me all these different options, he says, oh, and we've got a position in South Africa teaching small animal medicine. And I said, oh my goodness, Lord, like tick, 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 and I know not everyone gets that. Some people are really called into something where they're not comfortable or it's not what they expected or something. But I just found that so funny that the Lord could line up all of the three things that were kind of on my list of where I felt I had the skills and experience and the desire to be. So yeah, that was how it was there, and that was kind of the only place I really considered at that point. I went on a vision trip, flew down to South Africa with someone from CVM who had spent some time down there, and kind of signed the paperwork and the memorandums of understanding, and came back and started support raising. I had already filled out the basic introduction paperwork with CVM at that point in time and the references and everything. So yeah, that was how we ended up in South Africa.
That's pretty amazing, the way it's almost as if God was orchestrating things.
Amazing, huh?
Amazing.
Well, and the other
Oh,
interesting little side note to all this is that I did my veterinary degree at the University of Glasgow.
mm,
And Glasgow being in the UK and South Africa being a former Commonwealth country, they have reciprocal agreements between their veterinary universities. So the degrees are equal. So
wow.
I didn't have to do a foreign graduate exam in South Africa, which I would have had to done if I had a US degree.
Mm,
So I just sent in my paperwork to South Africa and my fee, and I was fully licensed, just took a couple of months. And so, it's the little
that's
things
awesome.
like that. Yeah, that I hadn't planned on going to South Africa. That wasn't why I went to Glasgow, but it
Mm.
had that extra benefit. So the Lord really does have all these things planned out in advance.
Well, and we look at those different, there was another CVM missionary who talked quite frequently about mile markers, about looking back and
Mm-hmm.
not
Yeah.
necessarily knowing how far you have to go, but looking back
Mm-hmm.
and you can see those places where God really was working, even
Yep.
though you didn't, even thinking about going to Glasgow it was not South Africa it was in the picture, but God
Mm-hmm.
was actively working
Mm-hmm.
to help with those transitions. Had you now, had you thought about missions? Now, were like before you went to vet school, were you a believer? Was missions something that you had been exposed to prior to to making this kind of a jump? Or
Yeah, I had been a believer pretty much all my life. According to my mom, I
Mm,
accepted Jesus when I was 4 years old, sitting on
mm,
the kitchen counter. I don't remember that experience, but she does.
mhm,
So yeah, so I grew up in the church, and I can remember when I was a kid, and it was still maybe more normal for churches to have missionaries come speak at like evening services and stuff.
right.
I just don't see that as much anymore. But and so you'd hear all these stories, but it never really. I never was a person who felt, the call to long-term missions from an early age or something like that. I thought it was cool, and that was great, and I was happy to pray for missionaries and support them, but it wasn't something that I necessarily had planned for my life.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, it's just you never know where the
right.
Lord is going to take you, and as long as you're just open and available, things can go
Well,
into crazy places.
well, and then it's also, I'm also amazed as I've been doing these podcasts and talking with so many folks. I'm also amazed at how God puts people in your path that kind of help with that. So you think
Mm-hmm.
about, Heidi Janicki, who I just
Mm-hmm.
did some podcast time with her,
Yep.
um, and Dave Curtis. When I first came
Mm-hmm.
back, I was a region rep under his leadership, and just thinking about the impact that those people make. How much God uses that along the way. And then so now as you're thinking about that, looking back, you're thinking about those individuals. Um, here you are almost a decade later, being one of those people sitting at the table
Mm-hmm.
who might be having the same
Uh-huh.
conversation with someone else. How does that strike you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's not something where you go out and you think, "Oh, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have this life-changing
Mhm.
conversation with this person today." And
Right.
and Heidi probably doesn't remember that comment that she just made off the cuff. I
Mhm.
don't even think I ever met her again after that. Uh, Dave, I certainly did, and he was all excited that he'd like convinced me to go into long term.
Mhm.
But yeah, so often I think it's just the simple things that we say or do, and um, what she actually asked me was, if you could do anything in this life and not fail, what would you do?
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, I would love to do like long-term missions work overseas. That'd be really cool. And that's what she said. Well, what's holding you back? And that's why I said, student loans. So that was actually the question that she asked me. So,
That's a
sometimes
great
just,
question.
yeah, just bringing people to think, if taking away the things that might be barring you, what would you really love to do?
Mm.
And then, how can we get there? Because there might be someone else at the table who has the answer for whatever
Yeah,
is holding you back.
literally.
Literally.
Literally speaking.
Yep.
So then so from that you took the vision trip, as after talking with Fred, you see that God is continuing to leave doors open, not only leaving doors open, but seemingly has put labels and names on doors and ready for you to
Yeah.
walk through them. And
Yep.
so you come back to the United States, you've kind of got this clear vision, or at least as clear a vision of where God is taking you next. What was that process like for you, going from the decision making process to actually getting onto the airplane headed to South Africa? How was that process for you?
Yeah. So it took me about 2 years from decision to touchdown in South Africa. About a year and a half, if you count from like after the vision trip and when we really kind of started working specifically towards that goal, because there's a lot of paperwork and stuff like that beforehand. But once I actually like officially started raising support, it was about a year and a half. I have to admit that was a real challenge for me. And I know there are a lot of benefits to support raising, and I met some amazing people and formed some really great friendships. But I'm very much an introvert. I don't like interacting in like large groups, and so it was hard for me. And I'm not the kind of person who easily calls someone else and like, "Hey, will you support me in my
Right.
ministry?" It was just difficult for me. It was definitely stretching. And so it probably took me longer than others. It was also very interesting. I had reached about 66% of my monthly support. So with CVM, you end up developing a budget for that includes your salary, other benefits like your healthcare and disability and all of those other things. And then your anticipated project costs, how much you're going to need for vehicles and visas and transport and, all that kind of stuff. And so you figure yourself out a one-time budget. So what it's going to take you to fly there and get the basic documents and buy your car and set up your house. And then you have your kind of monthly ongoing expenses. And so you really need to have people supporting you monthly who have committed to support monthly or yearly to an amount sufficient to cover your anticipated monthly expenses before CVM will let you leave to go to the field. They need to make sure that you're going to have what you need before you go.
Right.
So working on kind of raising that, I'd gotten to about 60% of my monthly support and just stalled. Like nothing was happening. I was going nowhere. I was part of a very small church at that time. And I really liked the church. It was very active in the community. They had like a youth center in the evenings, and we had like a soup kitchen a couple of nights a week for our small town. And it was a plant from a larger church. And our church, I had been very involved. I led Bible studies. I did the audiovisual, things like that. So I definitely was playing a role. There were probably like 20 adults in the church. It was that small. And our church allowed the high school students to come in and do a concert in our building. Some of it was obviously secular, but we also had a couple of Christian students that did Christian music as well. But someone from the head church had been there, and they felt that was absolutely wrong. We should not have had secular music in the church. And that concert happened on a Friday, I think, and we were closed by Wednesday. Like they just shut our doors. That was it. You can no longer exist. And that was obviously a bit traumatic and frustrating. But within 2 weeks, the other 40% of my support came in, and I was like ready to go. So obviously the Lord had me there for that time in that season.
Yeah.
And when that was done, okay, now you can go to South Africa. And I had really had to get to the point where I had said, Lord, this is obviously in your hands. I'm kind of doing what I can. I know I'm no good at this. But if you want me to go, you'll bring in the money. Otherwise, I'm going to serve where you have placed me now. And, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But then it happened. So once my full support came in, I had promised my boss at the time that I'd give him a 3-month notice. So I gave that 3-month notice, finished out those 3 months at work, did a couple of missions preparation training courses. So the one I went to is called CIT, Center for International Training, something like that, intercultural training. And so it's a month-long course on intercultural ministry, living overseas, just everything, spiritual preparation, everything. So I did that, and I think I had another training that I did, and then I was on my way to South Africa.
So how do you think that I mean, looking back now, right, you can reflect. How do you think that preparation process was getting you ready for that next stage of your ministry?
I don't know. I don't know if it was so much getting me ready or if it was God just needing me somewhere else at the moment, and then and then sending me off. I do think the trainings that I went to were good. I wouldn't say like they were life-changing as far as my ministry, but I think it was really good to take that month and a half out and be somewhere different, away from all of the stresses and the responsibilities of life, and really focusing on, my relationship with the Lord and kind of preparing spiritually to go. I think that's really what I found most beneficial. And then just being for a month with other people who are also doing the same thing. Kind of that month of Christian living with a Christian group all together, I just found really refreshing and encouraging, and I think started me off in a strong place.
Well, and it is kind of a common theme, even talking about short course, just the idea of having that time of focus and that time of separation, almost a little bit of Selah, right? That little pause in life. And I think a lot of us get really busy with these big ideas, and we're involved with this at church and that at church and this at work and family and all these different things. And we don't really just take the moment to focus in on what God is saying to you and speaking to you, and the places where He's leading you, so that you can really give Him that kind of attention and allow Him to kind of to work in that way. Well, I think that beginning process has been really interesting to hear. Do you think that if you had a recommendation for someone who might be kind of, they're thinking about mission, is there a recommendation that you would make to someone who's kind of either toying with the idea or is just not sure about it, how to better hear and how to better pause in order to make those kinds of decisions?
Doing something like short courses is really good, because it does take you out of kind of the normal hustle and bustle and put you aside where you can kind of think and pray and have those conversations with other believers. There's a lot of other missions training options out there, both short and kind of longer term as well, that could be considered. Because it's really hard to do that in life, in just your normal life. Even if you take a vacation, it's not quite the same thing as having kind of devotions with other believers and specific tasks to do to kind of prepare yourself and things like that. So I think some sort of a time away is really beneficial.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. I certainly, coming into this, I knew that we're gonna have to talk multiple times, because there's a lot I want to talk to you about. And I think if you're still warm and there's no rain falling yet, I think I'd like to talk with you next about that time, that initial point of time coming into South Africa, and then how ministry kind of evolved for you in South Africa. Things that you were confident and expecting, and then things that just caught you out of nowhere. I'd like to hear some of those stories as well. So if you're willing to stick around, now for everyone else listening, they're gonna have to come back again next week. That's how we hook them, right? That's right.
Exactly.
You just bait, and then you just reel them in. Is that how? No, hopefully if you have been listening, Rebecca's story is not so different from your story. God has a plan for you. He has been working in your life, even in ways that you don't fully understand, even at this moment. And as you're listening, if you're thinking, maybe God is taking me a direction. Look, faith is not completely an individual sport. It's a team sport. And what better way to better hear what God is saying to you than to take that time and pause, surround yourself with like-minded believers, to be able to take time to pray and hear as God speaks to you through them as well. There are many that have gone through very similar experiences. And when you take that time to pause, when you take that time to listen, you're learning how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you were blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.